Hey, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of They Live by Film. We are going to do something slightly different today because we had a very pleasant surprise. I know, Adam, Zach, I know y'all know the whole story by now, but just to kind of recap for everybody listening. So I reached out to, off the back of the Arbelos, the exposure to Arbelos series that I did on Reddit, I reached out to one of the people that was active on Reddit from what I thought was Arbelos, Craig Rogers, the restoration specialist. And then it turns out that Craig was extremely appreciative for sort of like, bringing exposure to boutique labels. And he said, but I have some exciting news for you, dot, dot, dot. Give me a few weeks. So a few weeks pass. And then he writes me back and he says, okay, I can talk about it now. It turns out he's starting a new distribution label called Deaf Crocodile. So I'm sure y'all remember. And he would be willing to speak to us about this new label. So I'm sure y'all remember when I wrote that, right? When I wrote
Yeah,
y'all
yeah,
about that.
yeah, absolutely.
What I wasn't expecting, and why I'm so, why we're doing this special episode, is that Craig's business partner is Dennis Bartok, and I don't know how much y'all know about that name. He's sort of the guy behind the guy, but he did programming at American Cinematheque for most of his career, and they do they produce the programming for the Egyptian Theater and the Aero Theater in Los Angeles, and they have basically anybody who's ever been an actor or a director or a producer in Hollywood has come through Dennis's programming at some point. And Leonard Maltin called him the guy that knows more about film history and the culture of Hollywood than anybody else alive.
Well,
So I was a little bit intimidated to speak with them, as you can imagine. Uh, Being this is my first ever interview with somebody who's actually in the film industry for a podcast where we have 6 episodes. And I would just set it up as a 10-minute interview. And yeah, I did my research. I learned about their backgrounds. I learned about Dennis Bartok's mom, who was kind of an experimental avant-garde filmmaker. I had my whole thing ready to go. Craig, who's done some of the most amazing restorations in the last 10 years, including Zach Assault on Precinct 13, he's working on in 4K right now, which I know you're excited about.
I am.
And Dennis, get on this line, and I have Wi-Fi issues, and it's not going well, but they're super nice. So finally, I have to literally run to my office, which is luckily about a 4-minute run, and get on proper Wi-Fi and sit down and have this 10-minute conversation, which turns into this episode you're about to hear today. Couldn't be nicer, couldn't be more human, couldn't be more accommodating. They just want to talk about movies and film and collecting, and they break down. We're about to hear it, but just the honesty when they break down the cost of producing movies and the pain of working with estates and rights holders for these movies, and how you have to walk that delicate balance of knowing what the consumer wants, but also having to be able to wanting to work with that estate for future releases. And just anyways, what an amazing first interview. This is one of those moments where I feel like I should just stop now because there's no way that everybody else is this nice.
yeah, it's obviously we've listened to it beforehand. We're going to show you guys now, the listeners, how it went. It's an incredible interview. As Chris said, it wasn't really like a normal interview where we just sort of ask questions and things like that. So we find the best way to sort of let you guys listen is just for us to drop you in the middle of their conversation and just take in the knowledge and the niceness and the sincerity of these two guys. And Chris, you did a bang up job of talking to these and reaching out to these guys. It's really, really great stuff.
Trauma distributed Killer Condom,
Yeah, yeah.
which was one of their pickups, and I think I watched more trauma films than the guys that run the company because I watched some films that I was like, if you guys actually sat through this entire movie, you would have never distributed it.
Oh my gosh. So, okay, not as cool as that, but just to let you know, we're on the same wavelength here. So, a couple years after getting married, my poor wife, we were up in New York City on a holiday together, and I drug her through the industrial side of Queens to the front door of Troma Studios, and I just knocked on the door, and some intern answered, and I was like, "Can I get a tour?" And they were like, "I guess." So I actually got a tour, and I got to meet Lloyd. He was just sitting at his desk, and then the elusive Michael, or whatever, the guy that's all, there's a joke.
Yeah.
he never
Right.
shows his face. I
Yeah,
actually
Lloyd's the front man. Lloyd's the extrovert, and
Michael
Michael is
Hurts, I
the
think.
sort of behind the scenes money guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, love that, and obviously love foreign cinema. So then got turned on to Arbelos, and just between having a kind of a new job, new career, and then a young kid, I didn't know Cinelicious until later through Arbelos. So I apologize for that, but I fell in love with both Cinelicious and Arbelos here in the last few years, and um, I just have always kind of had a passion for writing. So I started writing. It's called like an exposure to series. I don't know. It's not like I just put it on Reddit, and I've gone through all of Arbelos, and that's when I started noticing that Craig was active on Reddit. And we've connected just a little bit, and through Reddit connections, so three of us, one person in Ireland, one person in North Carolina, and myself, developed a podcast where we talk about the movies that we're watching as part of a film club. And the middle segment there is something we call Collection Corner, and we just talk about our collections. And our bellows kept coming up, and then so I reached out to Craig and found out about Deaf Crocodile. Here in the last.
So are you a physical media, like a Blu-ray and DVD collector?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a book about film collectors and film dealers called
I have some questions about that book.
Yeah, Thousand Cuts. And I've been a collector myself for many years. I started out with baseball cards and coins and comic books, and then segued into record collecting, which has sort of stayed with me the longest since I was about 15.
Okay.
And also movie posters, and to a lesser degree, I think, than you guys, Blu-rays and DVDs. Although I do have.
My phone is propped up right now, and
I probably have like maybe 800 to 1,000 DVDs and Blu-rays.
That's great.
So, but they're all in the garage. My wife is incredibly patient with my records, thank God. Books, I have a lot of books as well, movie posters, but she can't stand looking at the spines of Blu-rays and DVDs. She said it makes the house look like a college dorm room to her.
You have to pick your battles, I guess.
Exactly. I'm like, because if she said no, I can't look at the records, and those have got to go in the garage. That's be the end. So all the stacks of all the racks with Blu-rays and DVDs are in the garage, and I have to go in there on a nightly basis and retrieve them, bring them in and watch them, and then they go back.
That's great. Craig, what were you saying?
Where do you keep yours?
I was just saying it's a good thing that they met now and not 20 years ago, because 20 years ago she wouldn't have wanted to look at those records.
And now they're cool again.
Yeah.
So it's funny you ask, Dennis. So up until we had a child, he's about to turn 4. So up till 4 years ago, it was sort of like something that I was kind of a compromise. It was in a relatively prominent place. But once we started consolidating with the kid, it actually is in his nursery bedroom. And I watch a lot of horror, and I love horror films. So there's a sheet over it because he gets scared when he sees the covers.
I have to say, this is an amazing time to be a horror fan, especially a cult horror fan, because not only can you see, for example, almost everything that Mario Bava or Dario Argento ever directed, with a couple exceptions, on now Blu-ray and streaming, but they're putting out Paul Naschy films on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Which is kind of mind-blowing to me, that you can see
and the
beautiful scans, like 2K or even 4K versions of Paul Naschy films it really is a brave new world. I mean, these are all the movies that when I first started programming at the Cinematheque in the 90s, you would find these 3rd and 4th generation kind of bootleg VHS copies at like Jerry's Video in Los Feliz, if you were lucky. So, it is amazing that there are all these sort of niche companies out there that are able to restore and re-release these films. Now, what I have to ask, what are some of your favorite horror directors or horror films, right, or eras of horror?
Yeah. So I've gotten a lot into Gallo or Galli films. So there's this label called Raro Video that is done pretty good job. So between Arrow Video, Arrow Films, Raro, Severin, and to lesser extent, Vinegar Syndrome, but for sure Blue Underground. There's, you can find Synapse is another one. You can find almost, like you were saying, I mean, if you want to go on a Mario Bava run, they're almost all there, except for some of his early comedies. For sure, like the Fulci films are almost all there. So you start.
I don't think anybody has put out. They put it out on DVD, but I don't think it's come out on Blu-ray. Blu-ray yet is I Vampiri, which is an early film that Bava shot, and I think wound up co-directing when the director quit. Weirdly, there's very few Maciste Hercules movies on Blu-ray. I think the only one maybe that's available on Blu-ray is really the masterpiece, which is Hercules in the Haunted World, which just came out on Blu-ray, and that really is the best. But there are a lot of really great. The Mickey Hargitay, Jane Mansfield one is fantastic. The Theory of Hercules, The Witch's Curse, which is a Freda film, but it's a little bit similar to Hercules in the Haunted World, which starts out as so great. Maciste rides into a little Scottish village, like in the 18th century, bare-chested, wearing like a fur loincloth. And there's a bunch of Scottish villagers standing around wearing like cotton mather outfits with like conical hats. And they all go, "Hello, Maciste, good to see you again." And I was like, not only are they not surprised, but he's been there before. And then, of course, he has to go into the underworld and defeat a bunch of demons and stuff. It's just fantastic.
So, like, this conversation is exactly where I went about 10 years without doing anything with film just because of career kind of getting off the ground. And I started some businesses and stuff. And I got back into it in 2019. And Reddit has been a godsend for me, because just to be able to find people that can, at my management consulting firm, there's not a lot of people that I can talk to about this kind of stuff. They do their MBA and they learn how to speak corporate speak, and you start talking about, Irreversible, and you get fired, you're not going to get, or some Gaspar Noé film, let alone some of the crazy stuff that is out there. So
if you want to get Craig going, though, you got to talk to him about Prince, because he is the biggest Prince fan I know.
Oh, yeah?
Oh.
A little bit.
That's fantastic. Is the rest of the room that's not in frame, is that all Prince memorabilia?
No, I try to keep the home decor, something everyone likes. Or yeah, it would be a little. I did when I turned the garage into a workspace. I did paint it purple, though.
That's fantastic. There's I love Prince's work. There's a fantastic Kevin Smith has a great bit on one of his early stand-ups where he talks about shooting a video of Prince that never got released. Have y'all heard that stand-up bit?
Yeah, he talks about Prince twice on his evenings with Kevin Smith. Yeah, he did. He shot, edited, finished, completed, turned in a documentary, and it's just sitting in the vault.
It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
That's
actually something. Now that I've heard about that, we have to track down Kevin Smith and see if we can get access to that.
Well, they've been releasing the estate's been releasing stuff out of the vault every year now, so that'll probably come out now at some point.
Wow. Craig is also a huge comic book aficionado, and actually works with a number of really amazing comic book artists, and has a collection of original comic book art that is really groovy as well. So
that's fantastic, Craig.
Yeah, Brian Boland is a British artist that he drew the cover to a Prince comic book. And I've always wanted to find that artwork and make it mine. And last I heard, Prince himself had it. So I've stopped dreaming. I don't think that'll be coming out of there.
Yeah.
Well, I know that one of the focuses of Deaf Crocodile is animation. So is that kind of the tie-in, is your love for comics and graphic novels? And
yeah, it's actually the restoring animations a lot more work, but it's also really fun because the handmade quality of it, you can really see that and want to, maintaining that Even though I'm trying to clean it up as best as possible, there's still a lot that's not perfect because it was all done by hand and pasted together. And so getting to see, it's kind of like getting to see the behind the scenes and how it was made when I'm doing the restoration work. So
Well, you should tell him a little bit about what went into the restoration of Belladonna of Sadness, because that was a really
was
complicated, ambitious project.
Yeah, we got the negative, scanned it, and then they also sent us a little beta videotape that we could, use as a reference. And as they were putting the scans together, we realized there was quite a bit of footage missing from the negative. There's a whole, almost looks like Schoolhouse Rock animation segment that was just gone. And then when we started really looking into it, there were lots of shots that were trimmed. And it didn't seem like it was trimmed for content, because a lot of them were just a few frames short here, a few frames short there. So I don't think did we ever get to the bottom of exactly why they were cut out? Because it seemed like maybe we were thinking maybe for timing for television or something, because
there was a
there was no point in cutting 5 frames off a shot here and 6 off a shot there when it wasn't changing the content at all.
Yeah, so Belladonna of Sadness came out in the early 70s, and it was the last feature released by Mushi Productions, which had been started by Osamu Tezuka, who is the kind of godfather of anime and manga in Japan, and created series like Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion and things like that. And in the early 70s, his company decided to kind of expand into trying to do animation for adults with more adult themes and content. Yeah, films like that. And Cleopatra, Queen of Sex, I think was the other film. And the last of them, which was by far the most surreal and bizarre, was Belladonna of Sadness. I think it actually came out when the company was imploding and folding, and it was restructured and reborn, and it continues to this day, but is essentially as a kind of a different company. And when the film came out, sort of barely in theaters in Japan at the time, it was not successful at all. And they tried to do a re-release of it, I think in the late 70s, aimed at a younger, I think possibly like a teenage audience. And so they went in and cut out about 7 minutes of footage from the original camera negative and threw it away or lost it. So we got these reels of this beautiful original 35 millimeter negative, but then you would look at the side of the reel and you would see splicing tape, splicing tape, splicing tape, splicing tape, and each of the reels, and all that footage was just gone. And the way that we were able to restore it during Craig's restoration that he oversaw was we found an original release print of the film, the long version, that was deposited with the National Film Archive in Belgium, the Cinémathèque Royale in Brussels. And they were good enough to do a 4K scan of those missing segments, which then Craig had to insert, and we had to kind of try to make them match, as closely as possible.
Play with the grain and sharpness, and there was a lot of work with the color correction to get it to match. One of the other problems is this print from Belgium had French subtitles burned into it.
Okay.
So we had to digitally remove those, which luckily, the one I thought was going to be the most complicated because there was so much going on behind it. Once I started looking at it, I could see that the pattern flying behind it was in a loop. So I found frames that didn't have the subtitle, and I could use those sections because it was a continuous loop that they were running in the background, to get rid of the subtitles and then reuse the frames that didn't have subtitles on it. So we really dodged a bullet with that one.
That's great. Otherwise, you're kind of essentially like with erasing it, like in the old paint programs, like just getting an eraser and making it the colors match on every single letter. Is that what you've had to do otherwise?
Well, yeah, but it's tough because you don't have the image. You know, if it was like a person walking by, that's really tough because you'd have to basically just recreate a person walking by. So we got lucky there. And then with the color grading, I was really worried that it wasn't going to match that well, going from original negative and then from a print. But if you watch it now, you won't be able to tell which parts were cut in.
No, I mean, I certainly couldn't when I saw it. It wasn't obvious as I was going through it. That was also a beautiful animation style. I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, if there is other stuff in that style, I just haven't seen it. But that story is so heartbreaking. It was like this crazy mix of just like, I was in awe of the way the animation was done. In the background, there's just like tragic, really heartbreaking story going on.
Well, and the other great thing is that the main creative talents behind the film, the director, the illustrator, and Masahiko Sato, who did the amazing psychedelic soundtrack, were all alive. You know, when we did the restoration, and we were able to interview them in Japan and include that in the release of the film, and we did a limited run of a companion book as well with original artwork and their interviews. So that was really great that the filmmaker and the creative talent behind it were able to see it restored and re-released and finally get amazing acclaim, and now regularly shows up on lists of, you know, the wildest and greatest sort of underground animated films ever made, and for a movie that was almost completely unknown before we had done the restoration and the re-release. So that's really gratifying that the filmmakers themselves were able to enjoy that acclaim that they really deserved.
That's amazing. My favorite quote from his interview is when he says that he thought he was going to have full control of the marketing, and then when he actually went to the marquee, it said from Astro Boy to Belladonna, and he was like, "Why would you advertise that?"
Because Astro Boy fans are going to love Belladonna.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to learn. So the best I could do at research and guessing was Deaf Crocodile was D and C. So it was just a way of kind of playing with your names a little bit. Is there anything to that? Or
that's funny. No, that didn't even cross our minds.
No, I'll tell you, Deaf Crocodile comes from a fantastic old Hollywood story that was told to me by the great British actor Terence Stamp many years ago when we had him at the American Cinematheque for a tribute. And he called me up the next day just to like bullshit and tell old Hollywood stories, which nobody else has ever done, especially not somebody on the level of Terence Stamp. And so we're talking on the phone for an hour, and I'm just holding the phone out here, and literally I'm like, I can't believe I'm talking to Terence Stamp on the phone. And somehow the topic of Victor Mature came up, and he said, "Oh, I have the best and the funniest Victor Mature story ever." He said in the mid 1950s, Mature was in Africa shooting a film, and the director, it was actually Terrence Young, who did Dr. No and From Russia with Love, some of the early Bond movies, wanted him to get out of a canoe in the middle of a river and wade to the shore. And Mature looked at the rushing water and he said, I hear this river is filled with crocodiles. And the director said, yes, that's true. There are a lot of crocodiles in this river. We've had a consultant and he said crocodiles are terrified of noise. So since dawn this morning, we've had people running up and down both sides of the river, firing guns and banging pots and pans. By the time we shoot, I guarantee there won't be a single crocodile left in that river. Mature looked at him skeptically, and he looked back at the water and he said, "What about the deaf crocodiles?" And I thought that story was apocryphal, right? I thought this is the greatest story, but it can't be true. And then a couple of years ago, I was online, just, web surfing, and of course started looking up Victor Mature, as you do. And I found a press article from a newspaper in Kansas that says, Victor Mature has misgivings about deaf crocodiles. And it turns out that was actually a real story. And subsequently, I have become friends with his daughter, Victoria, who's really a wonderful, lovely person. And I said, I'm a great admirer of your dad's. I tried desperately to get her dad to come out to the Cinematheque for a tribute, and he just, he wouldn't do it. I think he lived down towards San Diego way, and he was just interested in golfing. The latter part of his career, he just really wasn't interested in revisiting his movie career, which is a shame, because I think he made some really entertaining films.
Yeah.
But I said, I love your dad so much. He seems like he had a great sense of humor and healthy skepticism for the industry. And I said, and there's the great deaf crocodile story. And she goes, what deaf crocodile story? I said, this is the best story about your dad. You have to know this. So I actually sent her the newspaper clipping from the day, and she goes, oh my God, this is fantastic. I never heard that before.
That's great. Just quickly on American Cinematheque, where you're talking about that, I don't know, I did a quick check to see, IMDb has the year you were born. I don't think you would have been old enough, but did you ever make it to the Filmex conference or festival?
No.
Okay.
I didn't come out to Los Angeles until 1992, which was years after Filmex had come and gone. Although I worked with a lot of people who had been involved with Filmex, and in fact, the two guys that hired me in 1992 when I first came to work at the Cinematheque, Gary Essert and Gary Abrams, had started Filmex in the early 70s, and sadly they both died of AIDS within a year of when I came to work there. They got very sick, and that was a terrible period. Not a lot is talked about, but there was a period in the early 90s when AIDS, as it was devastating so many communities across the country, but it really wiped out this amazing generation of people in exhibition and programming in LA. Gary Essert and Gary Abrams at the Cinematheque, a wonderful guy who was in charge of programming for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and then Ron Haver, who was in charge of the film program at the LA County Museum. Yeah. They all died within, I think it was like a year and a half, and it left an enormous hole in the cultural film scene in Los Angeles. And that's right around the time that I had first come out to LA. So I heard a lot about Filmex and how amazing it was over the years. And I had Filmex catalogs, and I even organized a tribute to Filmex when the Garys, as they were known, because they were partners in life as well as in business, passed away, but I never got to go to Filmex, unfortunately.
There's a documentary in there somewhere for sure. That sounds terrible, and that's crazy to know that. Yeah, it
morphed. Filmex actually was the predecessor of the AFI festival. So the Filmex kind of shut down, but then was reborn as the AFI festival, which of course continues to this day. So it does survive in the way that, like, dinosaurs disappeared, but they came back as birds. So
sure, definitely. Well, a lot's changed since then. I even thinking about physical media, even at the time I've been collecting, which was just DVDs, kind of when I got into it, and people were still, that debate between VHS or do you switch to DVD was still going on in 2000. I guess I'm curious now, though, in 20 years of buying, it feels like, I'd be curious to hear y'all's take on this, but it feels to me as a consumer that this is a little bit of a heyday for physical media collecting. Does it feel that way on the other side of the coin as well?
Well, it's funny because we're in the business of acquiring for older films, restoring, and then releasing them theatrically, digitally on physical media. But one thing that a lot of consumers don't realize is that smaller companies like us typically will license a film for 7 to 10 years maximum.
Okay.
So a film can be available for that window of time, but then once that license expires, and if it's not renewed, then it can disappear again and OOP, out of print, as I'm sure you've seen many times. Um, and then there's still tons and tons of kind of orphan, lost, or just unavailable movies. Speaking of animation, there's another amazing Japanese anime film that we've been pursuing now for like 6 years?
Probably.
Right? So we have to be incredibly patient and persistent. And we've tracked down the rights holders in Japan, and we're just waiting for them to regain the rights, hopefully next year in 2022. And then hopefully do a deal with them and actually start the process of hopefully restoring. Wow. So we've had, by the time we hopefully can do a deal with them, it will have been like 7 or 8 years of just waiting to get the rights. Not even like restoring the film, but just waiting until we could do anything with it.
Well, what are some of the hidden costs that I might not know about just as a collector? Like that's a great one. Just even the travel and the administrative cost of just, trying to track this down and go to, but when it actually, once you do get the rights, what are some of the hidden costs we might not think about? If something comes out on the market at $30-$40 a pop, like what are some of the things that go into that might not be obvious?
Well, Craig, you can actually give them a rundown on what is involved with restoring a film, taking it from analog into a digital form.
Yeah.
Just getting the rights alone can be, thousands of dollars that you have to pay up front to the rights holder. Then you need to scan the negative, which is going to be probably at least $6,000.
Okay.
Color correction can be 10, 12,000. If you're doing HDR, that jumps up to 15 plus. Then the restoration work, it'll take me, if it's in average condition, like nothing horrible, but it still needs some work, that's going to take me minimum probably 2 weeks per reel. So a typical film is about 5 reels. So that's 10 weeks of just picture cleanup. Yeah. Audio needs to be restored. That's going to be anywhere between $6,000 and $10,000, maybe more. So, and then we haven't even got to marketing. You need to, cut a trailer, design posters, design Blu-ray packaging.
Right. Yeah.
Graphic design work.
You got to create the Blu-ray itself. Any extras that you would want to.
Just the Blu-ray itself, that can be 15,000, 20,000 to just get that produced and printed. So yeah, it's a.
So if you see
it's a lot of money.
4K restoration of a film, typically on the low end, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, you're probably looking at least 50 to 70,000. And that's a kind of low end 4K restoration. And if you're talking about studio level, like, something that Columbia or Warner's or, one of the big studios would do, you could be $150,000 to $250,000.
Oh shit!
I think our restoration of Belladonna, what was the final price tag for that? It was probably between 150 and 200,000.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And so you've got to then go try to make that up in 7 years before you lose the rights.
That's exactly. That's all money that the distributor is essentially putting in upfront with the hope that from the exploitation of the film, that you're going to not only recoup all of your expenses, but then make a profit on top of that.
So
it's a big risk. I mean,
and this is why people get very cranky when they see films that they have the rights to up on YouTube and people sharing links to stuff online that's completely bootlegged. It's people think it's not a big deal, but it's like, especially for smaller companies, like we need to make those sales or we can't keep putting these products out.
Just at a rough ballpark figure, I just did some quick math. It's about 10,000 copies to break even. Does that sound about right?
Well,
oh wait, no, because I'm not even.
You're distributing in multiple different forms or platforms. So basically, you've got your theatrical and non-theatrical screenings at sort of art house theaters and festivals. You've got your digital release on transactional, TVOD and subscription VOD services, educational. There could be TV sales, and your physical media. So,
okay,
there are a bunch of great companies out there like Arrow and Severin and others that concentrate primarily on physical media and do a really great job. But you really, I think the margins are really, really tight in terms of what you can spend versus how many units you have to sell before you make a profit at it. So you have to be really smart. I mean, I have great admiration for those companies, Blue Underground, a number of the companies you mentioned that you collect, Scream Factory, Shout Factory, they do a great job. I have a bunch of their Blu-rays because they know their audience, they know their market, they cater to it, they give that audience what it wants to buy. I think that's really key. Both as a filmmaker, because I've made movies as a director and producer in the horror genre, and I've also talked to a lot of film school students here and around the world. I've done seminars, and I said, one of the most important things, which they didn't really tell me, I went to NYU Film School in the 80s, and everybody was like, you've got to go out there and tell amazing personal stories, and you're going to be the next Scorsese or Jim Jarmusch or Spike Lee. But what they didn't tell us, which is really important, is you have to know your audience, and you have to make sure that there is an audience for those personal stories that you want to tell, right?
Yeah.
Because it could be the most amazing and powerful story to you, but if there aren't thousands, tens of thousands of people out there that want to experience that story, it's not going to go anywhere.
That was my exact reaction to Giuseppe Makes a Movie. I just felt like, how could this story not be bigger? Like, what a beautiful story, personal story, and like the characters were beautiful and sweet and like charming and just it was a little off center, and like it just couldn't find
I love Giuseppe. That was the first movie we acquired and released. I'm also friends with the director Adam Rifkin, and it's my favorite of all of his films, which are really wonderful. But Giuseppe, I think, is really special, and it's one of my favorite documentaries I've ever seen about the creative process, whether you love movies or not. So, unfortunately, Giuseppe, as he's grown older, I think has not done very well. I think he's got some issues, and the last that I had heard, I think he was actually in the Austin area, but was really struggling and having a hard time, which I was really sad to hear about. So
it's too bad. That's okay. That's unfortunate. Well, I'm sensitive that I've gone way over the 10 minutes that I requested. I love you guys being able to be open about this. I have two more questions if you're open to it. How are y'all doing on time? You're okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, I can't bring a restorer on a call and not ask about the Wong Kar-wai debate. So there's, I'm not asking necessarily even to give a professional opinion, where I guess the thing I'm more curious about from your perspective, of somebody that has to kind of balance that between what the customers, the consumers are going to want, and what the filmmakers and the the family or the estate is asking for. What's that tension like? With someone in your seat, like how do you kind of balance that, and or do you just have to go with what the state wants? Like,
well, we've been pretty lucky with we haven't run into those kind of conflicts where they want to drastically change something. We haven't had that problem, but if we did, it would be, yeah, it's difficult because like the filmmaker has, it's their film. So and if you don't want to burn bridges, like if you ever want to work with them again, like if you're just pull a hard line and be like, absolutely not, we're not doing what you want, and you're never going to work with them again. So it's a tough position. I'm glad we haven't had that issue, really.
yeah. Well, like, what if John Carpenter had wanted a Teletubby in Assault on Precinct 13? Would you have, you just got to do it?
Well, you as diplomatically as possible, you really try and talk them out of it. And usually the best way to talk somebody out of something is to go to their ego.
Well, there is the sort of director's version of The Warriors, the Walter Hill film, where he went in, like if you get it on Blu-ray now, and he has these kind of comic book panel inserts that introduce the various chapters of the film, because he always felt that it was sort of like a live action comic book.
Interesting. Okay.
It definitely gives it that vibe, but those were clearly not part of the original movie. So, it's that's a really tough decision because, the filmmaker or the rights holder, they're the people who created that work. I remember years ago we had George Lucas come to the Cinematheque. We did a tribute to Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound. And the opening night was a tribute to him in the Star Wars series. And we were showing what are called bake-off reels. Do you know what that term is?
No.
So for the visual effects Oscars every year, they used to take an actual physical print of a film and cut out the best visual effects sequences and splice them all together into like a 15-20 minute reel.
Oh, okay.
So they would kind of destroy a 35 or 70 millimeter print of a film, but they would create these unique kind of clip shows of just the great visual effects sequences. Well, of course, now that's all done, digitally with a couple, clicks of a mouse, basically. But in the olden days, they did that with actual prints. So we, I think, they had done episode 1 and 2 of the prequel, trilogy before, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So we screened actual film prints for original Star Wars, New Hope, on 35, and actually a 70 millimeter blow up print for Empire Strikes Back, which came from the collection of the Academy of Motion Pictures. Their film archive were very generous in loaning it to us. And the prints were a little faded because this was before they had LPP low fade print stocks, which were introduced in the early 80s, like 82, 83, I think is the changeover year. And in the case of the original Star Wars bake-off reel, it had the original visual effects. And so I was talking with Lucas in what we called a green room, which was actually a claustrophobic, cluttered little space outside of our box office. And I said, Mr. Lucas, thank you so much. I just have to tell you, the bake-off reels for the first couple films are kind of faded, and for the first one, it's the original visual effects. And he went, That's okay. Nobody's ever going to see it like that again, anyhow.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. He said that.
I was like, okay, you know.
Nobody in the audience knew that was the last time they were ever going to see you in that condition.
I think somebody did actually raise his hand and have the temerity to ask him about that. And I think he gave, what is his standard answer was that he didn't have the technology or the budget to do the effects the way he wanted initially. And so he felt like he should, have the right to go back and correct them, which I completely understand I guess from a pure archival and film loving perspective. I do think that you should preserve the original release of the film because that's how film,
I think that's what frustrates everyone is that it's not so much that people are don't like or want the new stuff, but they want the option to also see how it was originally.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't quite understand the hard stance they've taken on. It's like, no, you can only see the new one.
If you want to watch Amadeus, which is one of my wife and I's favorite films, love it, Milos Forman, masterpiece.
Great movie.
You can only get the original cut on DVD. Blu-ray is this extended director's cut that includes like 20 minutes of footage that nobody needed to see, including I think like nude sequences with Mozart's wife and stuff. That's just like, and all the reviews are like, why did they put this back in the movie? It was perfect. It was perfect in the original version. So that is a bit of a bummer when they remove the original and kind of force you to watch the new version. There is one way to see the original version of Star Wars, and I talk about it briefly in my book on film collectors, is there are a handful, maybe 6 or 8 surviving 35 millimeter Technicolor prints of the film that were made in England for the release there in 1977. And I think they were actually the last prints that were struck in England in dye transfer Technicolor, Ivy Tech, before they shut down that equipment. They had shut it down, the dye transfer printing facility here in LA in 74. I think The Godfather 2 was the last new film in which they struck Ivy Tech prints. Okay. They kept it running for a few more years, and Star Wars was the last one. So in the collector's market, there are a few of these incredibly rare British Ivy Tech prints of the film, and I've actually seen one. And it was not what I expected, because of course you think dye transfer Technicolor and you sort of think eye-popping saturated colors and the red shoes and great Powell and Pressburger movies, Black Narcissus. And it was actually much more muted and kind of new Hollywood looking than I expected, especially the sequences on the Tatooine. And as I was watching this incredibly rare print, this was years ago, I suddenly had this incredible, like visceral, physical memory, like kicked me in the chest. And I said, this is what Star Wars looked like when I saw it in 1977.
Wow.
When I was a kid, when I was a 12-year-old kid at a multiplex in Pittsburgh. And I went like a week into the release. This is what it looked like. Because I think, over the years, not only have they, revised or altered the visual effects, and in some cases added, a couple digital characters, but they've also changed the color grading. And Craig, maybe you can talk about that really quickly. That's actually an incredibly important and little talked about aspect of restoration and re-release of movies that really alters people's experience of a film is the color grade process.
Well, it's certainly the part that gets Blu-ray collectors riled up when a new release comes out. first thing they do is you go on Blu-ray.com and people are comparing screen captures from the previous releases, and like look, and like, you know, the framing is slightly different and the color is slightly different, and then there's a huge debate over which one's better or which one's correct. And so it is interesting. I mean, it always comes up when there's a huge difference, like you were talking about the new box set that's coming out. And it's, I don't quite understand it when there's a huge change and there doesn't seem to be any reason. That's when, you know, it's not the director wanted to change it. You know, it's not that you know, they didn't have any sort of reference. Like I'm thinking of some of the recent releases of like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah.
Drastic color changes. And you know, like when we did the last movie, we found the last print that was made that was color graded and approved by Dennis Hopper and Laszlo Kovacs, and we screened that in a theater, so we knew what it's supposed to look like, especially if you're going back to the original negative, because the original negative could be exposed but then printed dramatically differently. And one of the things that I noticed when we were screening and I asked about it, and they concurred that yes, you'll notice in that film there's sometimes with the sky, the print was timed for the sky, so the clouds aren't blown out, the sky is nice and blue. Dennis Hopper's face might be, you know, too dark, but they wanted to make sure that the sky didn't blow out. So most films, they go the other way around. They want the actor to look perfect. If it makes the sky blow out, so be it. But for the last movie, that's not what they wanted it to look like.
You know, and people's memory and taste change over time. So the look of films is going to be very different now than if you were around in the 80s or the 70s. So if you're restoring a film now without even knowing it, you may grade it to match tastes today, contemporary tastes, as opposed to what it should have looked like in this 1970s or 80s, which is why you try and get.
We were just talking to Joe yesterday about the Assault on Precinct 13 restoration.
Yeah.
And one thing he said to me, he's like, well, when you get to the color grading, he's like, promise me. He's like, just promise me you're not going to make it look blue and orange like all modern films.
Wow.
And I was like, no, that's absolutely not going to happen. It's not going to be.
Apparently all the smoke from all the gunfire was like teal. For some
movie.
reason, when it was graded, the last time they did it, they made all the smoke look teal. And he's like, banish teal from your color palette. This is our friend Joe Kaufman, is the executive producer of the original Assault on Precinct 13 that we're in the process of doing a 4K restoration on.
Yeah.
So, but it's really tough. You know, in many cases, like films from the 70s, original prints are most likely to be faded unless they were struck on dye transfer Technicolor and you know, and haven't faded. Or if you're lucky enough that the director or the cinematographer is still alive, but if all of the main creative people are gone, and if all the original prints are faded to, you know, pink or purple, then you start having a really, you know, it's a very delicate balance. Like, you know, how do you color grade a film so that it's going to be as close as possible to the director and cinematographers?
I won't ask y'all to. Yeah, I want to ask y'all to go down this tangent just for the sake of time, but that reminds me of a documentary. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but they were walking over the process of restoring art, old paintings, and anyway, some of the similar topics came up. But you have to get a little bit creative sometimes as you're restoring some of these old pieces, especially if they've been in a basement for 50 years or 100 years, you know, like you have to make some choices along the way just to try to make it feel like that authentic experience.
When they cleaned the Sistine Chapel, and there was enormous outrage when they did that major cleaning in the past like 2 decades, and the colors were so much more vibrant because of course they removed hundreds of years of smoke and dirt and grime, and you know, millions of visitors and smoke from candles and incense, and suddenly you had these incredible eye-popping, almost like cartoonish colors, and people were screaming, art historians, about how they had ruined the, you know, the Michelangelo's work and the frescoes, and they looked like, you know, characters out of a comic book. And it's like, no, that's what they were originally supposed to look like. We had gotten used to seeing them occluded and obscured and darkened over the years.
Yeah, we have the same problem with movies. People get used to, especially if something that never made it to DVD. The only look people have ever seen is this flat, no color, no resolution, pan and scan VHS. But that image is burned into their brain of that's what that film looks like. And some people just have a hard time accepting that that's not what it was supposed to look like.
Interesting. Yeah, especially in a lot of the genre films where it's really hard to find prints to begin with. I was nervous talking to y'all coming in. This is the first time I've been speaking to people that are in the industry. This has been a phenomenal conversation for me. I thank you.
Hey, anytime you want to have us back, we're happy to
Dennis and I can talk about movies endlessly.
Gab about movies. And you get to see my teenage son's bedroom. This is what I use as my office during the pandemic. So you get Dr. Dre, The Chronic, and you get Tupac, and so Disneyland amazing. Records carousel. That's mine with all the Beatles and Yardbirds single.
So. He's got to put that in there. That's amazing. Well, I'm sure we will. I guess the last question for now, because this is an interesting time. Was it Thursday of last week or Wednesday of last week? I finally got the newsletter from y'all introducing some of the titles that are coming theatrically, which I was really excited about. When can we as collectors expect to pick up spine number 1 and 2 of these wonderful Indian films, or whatever you have, you know, planned, I guess, from Deaf Crocodile?
It'll probably be end of the year, I would imagine, because we're going to wait until art house cinemas really are able to reopen, you know, when enough people get vaccinated and they think it's safe and audiences start to return.
Yeah.
So the first films that we've acquired, we've told the filmmakers and the rights holder, look, we want to wait so that your movie gets a theatrical release, followed by, you know, home video and digital and TV and everything. And they're really behind that. I think they all want to see art house theaters reopen and see their movies on the big screens.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably looking at, you know, September for theatrical, and then typically if we are doing a home video release, it would be, you know, 3 or 4 months after that. So
okay. Well, it's the Paramount Theater down here in Austin. I'm sure y'all probably know that, but that's the kind of the major one. So I can't wait to see it there. I hope it shows.
And I love the Draft House cinema locations. So, and of course, the big news today that Chapter 11, although I'm sure they're going to be able to, you know, reorganize and hopefully keep a number of those locations open. Because
it sounded like the plan was going to actually put them in a much better position.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you'll have time for the last one, just because you brought up Alamo, Dennis, kind of tied to your book. I have not read it yet, so in full disclosure, I found out about it when I was researching and kind of prepping for this, but I bought it, so I will be reading it soon.
Oh, thank you.
But did you get a chance to go through Tim League's archives at any point?
I have not, and I would love to, especially his poster collection, because I know he's a major poster collector. I have to say the AGFA, the American Genre Film Archive, which is sort of an offshoot of the Alamo Drafthouse and Fantastic Fest, is an amazing organization. Like something like that has been needed for so long to try and archive, preserve, restore genre films. Like my attitude is as a exhibitor, as a film programmer years ago, now as a distributor, is that kind of all movies are on a single level, whether it's an Italian giallo film from the late 60s or early 70s, whether it's a Croatian movie from the 80s, whether it's an amazing new art house independent film from India, or a 4K restoration of Assault on Precinct 13. Good movies are good movies. Doesn't matter if they're art house films, doesn't matter if they're genre films. Which also means that they all deserve to be appreciated and preserved, which is why it's great that AGFA, is out there now saying, hey, we want to archive these prints, we want to start scanning and restoring them and making them available, but also preserving them for the future. Because, film is a very impermanent, medium,
Yeah.
even, I think even prints that are made today under the very best of conditions have a maximum life of maybe 100 to 150 years. Now that sounds like a long time, but compare that to Renaissance paintings or the Sistine Chapel, or, pottery or bronzes or whatever, and 100 to 150 years is not actually that long. I mean, there are many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books that are much, much older than that. Like, it's not a big surprise if you find a book in a library used bookstore that's 100 years old. But if you find a film print that's 100 years old, you're like, oh my God, this still survives. Craig, just really briefly, you handled the original 35 millimeter nitrate negative of a 1909 D.W. Griffiths short called The Sun's Return, which I think is the earliest surviving film that Mary Pickford appears in.
Yeah, that was an amazing project.
That we worked at it there, or I should say Craig worked at Cinelicious restoration for the Museum of Modern Art in New York and the Mary Pickford Foundation. And the original 35 millimeter nitrate negative of that film exists. Now that seems incredibly precious to us, but if you held a book from 1909, you go, oh, it's an old book, but there's tons of books from 1909. So film is a very, very fragile and impermanent medium.
Wow.
Which is why it's good that there's so many collectors out there that have Blu-rays, and the more copies of something that are out there, the more chances that it will actually survive for another 50, 100, 200 years.
Well, that's exactly the argument I make to my wife when my collection creeps up. It's just over 3,700 now, and if I had more money, it would be 10,000. I mean, there's limitless, but yeah, that's all about preservation, which is actually one of the reasons I fell in love with AGFA and y'all. Honestly, is that kind of the attitude I got. So, anyways, unbelievable time chatting with y'all. We'll definitely be reaching out in the future.
Fantastic. Have you seen the Kino Blu-ray of the Golem that came out?
Yes.
Oh my God. Unbelievable. From the camera negative 4K restoration. I watched it like a week ago and I was like, my jaw was on the floor.
Yeah.
I was like, that looks so beautiful. It was amazing.
Yeah, I like the work that Kino's doing. It's amazing to think about the volume they've been able to push out as well.
The other one that I thought was remarkable, I got it as a gift for the holiday season, was their 10 classics of Yiddish cinema with the Dybbuk. And I know Serge Bromberg of Lobster Films, who's an amazing film historian and preservationist who helped rescue dozens of lost Méliès films and many others. And he's profiled in my book. And he was involved. He was responsible for the restoration of the book and a number of other films on that set. And I watched it, and I literally shot him an email, and I said, "Oh, geez, really, thank you. All praise to Serge for rescuing and restoring this film. It was really remarkable."
I love it. I love it. Craig, if on Reddit, there's a user named Captain Gibb. He's one of the mods for the Criterion sub. If you ever see him, he's gone deep down that hole. His knowledge of female filmmakers in the Soviet Union in the 20s is unparalleled. And anyways,
That's pretty specific.
Yeah, he actually wants to teach a course on that topic. I mean, he's pretty good on silent films in general, but we've connected a little bit just over preservation.
If you want to see a brilliant movie, watch The Last Bolshevik by my late friend Chris Marker.
Okay.
Absolute masterpiece. It's one of his brilliant sort of cine essays, but it's about his friendship with a Soviet filmmaker from the 1930s that he met and befriended much later in life. And it's about Soviet cinema and about the history of the Soviet Union and about the history of this man's life in the 20th century. Wow. Absolute masterpiece.
Okay, thank you.
The Last Bolshevik. Brilliant film.
I'll watch it.
Well, great talking to you, Chris. Thank you for letting us